Hi there, BookTube. This is Caitlin Bandy from Bandy's Books, and I have Jamie from Jamie Kate with me, and we are here for the first episode of the Backlist Book Club. So this is a book club that we recently started to try to work on books from our backlist. We basically define backlists as books that have been published over 5 years ago, nothing that is a current or new release, just to kind of help us help encourage ourselves to get some books off of the bookshelves. So earlier this month, we put up a poll with 4 books. We each picked 2, and we opened it up for voting. And the selection for the month was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. So this was published June 25th, 2019 here in the States. And I believe it was published in 2018 in the UK. And this was a wild ride. So before we get into that, though, I did want to mention that Moshfegh has been previously shortlisted for both the Man Booker Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award for her novel Eileen. This one was not a shortlisted book, but just that she's a pretty well respected author, and she's received a decent amount of critical acclaim for her writing. So, Jamie, did you want to summarize the book for us?
Sure, yeah, I will give a little premise overview. So this book follows an unnamed protagonist in the year 2000, and she is just out of college and she's doing relatively well. She has money, she has a good job, she has a boyfriend, and everything is going well. And yet she decides that she needs a break from life, and she goes on quite the journey to attempt to use medication to sleep through an entire year. And that goes to some relative success. And it follows her year as she attempts to break out of the life that she has in hopes of coming out better on the other side.
Fair enough. How did you feel about this book?
Yeah, I really had no expectations going in. I knew it was going to be really weird, and I also knew it was going to be pretty controversial, but I tried to have an open mind. And honestly, I really actually ended up enjoying this. I feel like it was the level of kind of controversial. It definitely has moments of being very shocking and just very odd, but I felt that it also had a lot to say, and I enjoyed that. It's definitely not going to be for everybody, but I was pleasantly surprised, I think, with what I got.
Yeah, so I felt pretty similarly. I want to say that this is like a book where I didn't love it and I didn't hate it, but I did feel like it said a lot, and I appreciated that. I think the main character makes it really hard to like thoroughly love this book. But I did really enjoy the writing style of it. I thought it was well written. I thought that it did some interesting things. I feel like the point of the book was for it to be difficult. I didn't think it was supposed to be an easy read, nor was the character supposed to be particularly likable. And yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, I didn't hate it. I was worried, as well when I was reading some of the reviews that this was going to be one of those books that was just like way too out there or way too unlikable for me to like get to or relate to in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I was definitely a little bit scared going in because I felt like from some of the reviews or the way that other people had talked about it, that it was going to be like just insanely, like, I don't know, like grotesque or something, like just like really, really out there to a point that it was like uncomfortable at all times. And I don't think it quite went that far. There's definitely a couple moments that are very that are a bit hard to read, but otherwise, like, I felt that yes, this character is unlikable. Yes, there are times that you just kind of hate being in her head, but I feel like that was completely the point, and I think Moshfegh kind of nailed that. And the writing still did keep me engaged throughout the majority of the time, so I was happy with that.
Certainly. I have a couple people popping in to say hi. So you have Brian. Hello. I was surprised by how much I liked the book. I am glad to hear that. I was worried, honestly, when this one won. I was like, oh gosh, I hope everyone doesn't hate us at the end of this because this is supposed to be kind of a controversial book.
Yeah.
And we have Sheila dropping in. Hello, Sheila. I see a couple other people have popped in the chat as well. So feel free to pop your thoughts in the comments, say hello, let us know what you thought of the book as we discuss.
Any ratings that you guys have? I think my rating lands at like a 3.5 3.75. So I enjoyed it more than I didn't.
I think I'm kind of right around the same area, actually. I would say like 3.75 to a 4,
Yeah.
just because I really appreciated the writing style of it, and I appreciated with what Moshfegh did with it. While I again, I found the character really difficult. I think it made some interesting commentary, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason it doesn't quite get to a 4 for me is like, I fully think that there are just parts of this book that I just like did not understand. Like I just did not like grasp. I think I'm like, there are times when I'm like, I think I need to be smarter to fully understand what Moshfegh is going for here. So I feel like maybe I could like it on even like a reread, where I could really like kind of dive into, or even just having these discussions helps a lot too.
I agree. I think one of the things, as I've been participating more in book clubs in general, is that I'm finding that listening to other people's thoughts on books really helps me to perceive the book differently than I might naturally. Sheila said, at times I was thinking, I don't like this character, but she is kind of interesting. Wasn't sure if I'd like it, gave it 4 stars. I agree. I think that you kind of go back and forth with her. It's hard, to really be on her side, but it's also hard to like really hate her all the way. Let's see. And then Brian said, I liked how we only got hints as the main character's issues and real feelings indirectly and rarely. I agree. A lot of stuff was like kind of sussing out what she's feeling. And I feel like she kind of hides a lot of her deeper feelings behind her horrible behaviors. Like it's like a protection mechanism in a way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the heart of this character, I mean, the reason that she's doing all of this is she wants to basically be numb from all of her feelings. Like it's stated multiple times that she does not, she's trying to escape her feelings in this very destructive way. Which I thought this character was so interesting, because it's just a choice that I think a lot of people wouldn't make. So
I agree. So we have some questions to discuss, kind of, to keep with the book club format. So I have those written in notes here. I figured we'll just go in the order of the ones that we wrote down. And then, if you have any comments or thoughts on these questions as we're talking about them, of course, add them into this chat. And we're going to get into spoiler territory at this point of the discussion. As we delve into this question or these questions, we, can't avoid discussing the main gist of the story. So if you haven't read it and you don't want it to be spoiled, this is the point to click away from the chat, unless you don't mind it being spoiled, in which case stick around. So the first question that we were going to discuss was if the narrator is reliable. Kind of goes into, what we were already talking about, like her using her like brashness and her unlikableness to kind of shield herself from actually really discussing things in depth. And I think it's pretty clear throughout the book that she's suffering from some form of mental illness. Does that make her an unreliable narrator?
In my opinion, I don't actually think she's unreliable. I think she's pretty honest about what she's feeling in the moment. I think that it's just a matter of her just not wanting to engage with all of her emotions on a deeper level, and processing the grief that she's going through and processing her feelings. And of course, like she acknowledges that she's very young and pretty and wealthy, and that she does have all of this privilege, and that if she wanted to, she could, walk through life pretty easily. But she's still honest with the fact that she doesn't want to do that. So I think to some degree, she's honest with herself, at least. But I think that there's just like a level of like just not willing to engage and kind of work through those emotions in a healthy way. I don't know if it makes it unreliable, but I do think it makes her very, difficult to be in the same headspace with.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily feel like that she felt like extremely unreliable either. I did wonder if maybe, like in my own experiences with mental health and things, if sometimes things maybe feel worse or seem worse than they are just because you're in such like a dark or difficult place. I don't know that that means that things didn't happen the way that she perceives them, but just maybe she perceives them in a little bit more of a dark light because she's in that dark place. But I would agree. I think that overall, I felt like she was fairly reliable. Looks like Sheila says, I don't think unreliable. We all have coping mechanisms. I agree. And Brian says, I agree that she isn't really unreliable in the normal sense. Yeah, I didn't feel like there was like any intentional misleading or anything like that. Just, we're seeing things from her perspective. And, we all skew our perspective a little bit to fit our own biases. And so I think it was just kind of... So question number 2 was, on the surface, the narrator has a life of privilege. She wants to sleep for a year, but not kill herself. What is her reasoning? Yeah, so that was a really interesting subject for me because I can't imagine wanting to sleep for a year, like no matter how horrible I have felt in life. There's been a couple like serious points of depression in my life. I've never ever felt like I just wanted to like sleep endlessly. So that was a pretty interesting concept for me reading that. I don't know if it's like magical thinking, if she thinks like, oh, if I just sleep through all this, I'll wake up and feel better, or if it's just a matter of like, man, this year is so overwhelming. This book is set in 2000, right before 9/11 takes place. It's a rough time period. You have Bush as president. There's just a lot going on. And so I kind of understand like wanting to sleep through that year. I certainly have felt that feeling recently in terms of like, I wish I could just skip ahead to some things. But yeah, I'm not sure if she had like exactly a rational reason for sleeping for a year.
Yeah. It's definitely fascinating. And what I found so engaging, especially at the beginning of this book, is that she is like so steadfast in this goal. Like she cannot be convinced not to do it. She can't be talked out of it. She can't, like, this is what she wants to do. And I think, I definitely hear people of my age group and just people saying like, we're tired, overwhelmed. And, I think I'm relatively close to the age that she would have been in this book. I think she's probably a little bit younger than me at the time the character is, but I think it's really getting to that feeling of kind of, I say right out of college. I don't know exactly how old she was in this book, but like, finally getting into the working world, and you have to deal with suddenly all of these things that are coming up around you, and it just feels so overwhelming that you're like, I wish I could just opt out. Like I wish I could just choose not to participate. But it's very interesting because she really seems to be doing it for the purpose of, like, she thinks that she will be a changed person after she, goes through this experiment. So she almost does have like kind of a hopeful light to it in a weird way. I don't know if I understand her reasoning, but I can definitely empathize with the desire to, if we had the luxury of opting out, like, I think I empathize with the choice to do that.
I definitely get that part. I feel like sometimes it almost seemed like, the like sleeping was like her drug, kind of like she's just like getting so blitzed that, she doesn't have to really process or deal with anything.
Yeah.
Let's see. My mom says most people can't afford to sleep for a year. Agreed. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the reality, is that like this character is obviously like this fantasy world because most people don't get to just check out like this. Brian said she's privileged, but she's also damaged, and numbness and sleep at least allow her to avoid thinking while healing, maybe. Yeah, I think that that's an interesting point because I don't know how much healing mentally you do by just sleeping. Like, if she had a physical wound, certainly sleep and rest might improve that. But I feel like with mental wounds, like, I guess maybe the time allows you to like heal to some degree, but I feel like this is more like, I don't know. She's like, I'm going to give myself a year to just do whatever I want. And then I'm going to compartmentalize everything and shove it down, because she doesn't really process the trauma that she experienced. She doesn't really process her parents' deaths. She doesn't really like deal with any of the things that are wrong inside of her. She just blacks herself out from it. And I think that is not the ideal way to deal with mental health.
Oh yeah. So, no, I mean, this is like a very unhealthy, coping mechanism in a lot of ways. it's very interesting to me that she constantly brings up, she brings up her privilege so much, and she says, I know I'm so privileged. I know I can, do this. And it's very interesting because no matter how privileged a person is on the outside, I think the point of this a little bit is to kind of delve into that, the mental aspect of it, of at the end of the day, like, everyone has something that they're dealing with, that they're going through, and how they choose to process those. And obviously she had a very rough situation with both of her parents dying, and obviously not a great relationship with her parents growing up. And no amount of money is going to change that situation, or that, psychological damage that's done there.
I kind of sometimes wonder too, when I'm thinking about this book, if Moshfegh wrote her as a extremely privileged person. Like you said, she mentions that she's wealthy, she mentions she's young, she's good looking, she's in good health and everything. So I wonder if she wrote her as this really privileged person to make it very hard to empathize with her. Because if she was, like down on her luck, unattractive, getting just the shit kicked out of her by life, you would feel a lot more empathy for her. It'd be easier to put yourself, in her shoes and be like, oh gosh, I've been there. I've had the bad luck. I've been bullied. I've been whatever. Whereas we have this person that in reality is just completely unrelatable to most people based on her like life situation. And I think maybe there's some commentary on like our own ability to empathize and be compassionate, just because it's so much harder to empathize for somebody. But I also agree with what you were saying before, that at the end of the day, wealth and privilege does not preclude someone from having mental health issues. It kind of makes me think of like when celebrities have very public, mental health crises, and how people are just so angry and unsympathetic. And it's like, you have everything in the world. Like, why would you, kill yourself? Why would you, need to go to rehab? Why would you have addiction and stuff like that? And it's just like, ultimately at the end of the day, the mental health doesn't choose people based on like wealth or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. She may not know why she's doing it. It's just a way to have perspective. Maybe. Maybe the sleep and the rest is just like allowing her brain to process everything. So let's see. Question number 3. So we kind of touched on this already, but does the time period setting of 2000 New York City affect the way the MC is feeling, or do you think she would have responded this way in any other year?
Yeah, I loved the discussion of the setting in this book, and then particularly comparing it to when it was written, which I believe is 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I think it's very, I think it was so clever to set it in this time period, because you have this protagonist who is saying things like, she's watching things on the news, horrible wildfires and destruction and war and all of these things that are obviously extremely present in our world today. And it's really, to me, I thought that was just like a very clever representation of this, not only cyclical nature of these things, but also just how there's just kind of constant hardship happening all the time, no matter what year you're in. And everyone's like, there were, good times and bad times. And, I think in any point in time, there probably would have been people saying it was horrible to be in that time. And I feel like that was a good representation through this book of her writing in 2018, being like, people were saying the same things in this time period.
That's fair. It's interesting too, because so I was in middle school in 2000, and I think I was towards the end of it. In fact, I remember watching the Twin Towers fall in my class. And so as somebody who lived through that time period, it's interesting because what's coming, where the setup is leading. And so I felt like, especially the Twin Towers and the 9/11 was just so present throughout the book, even though it never actually gets mentioned until the very end. But it's just, it haunts the book because you just know what this is coming up to. And it almost felt to me oh, is she gonna sleep through this whole year and then get out of her sleep thinking she's gonna be better, and then this tragedy is gonna occur and re-trigger her? So I feel like the setting was really important to the book. But that being said, you were pointing to, there's shitty things that happen in all years. And I guess there's, years that seem worse than other years. But like, certainly if this book was set in 2024, I think it would still be really relevant. You'd be like, hey, yeah, all the reasons to clock out.
I think that's so funny. Like, honestly, I was thinking about Otessa Moshfegh writing this book in 2018. And I'm like, you don't even know what's coming up. Like,
you're like, girl, hold my beer. Yeah.
But you're so right about 9/11 really haunting this book in every way, and that's done so intentionally. And I didn't even know if she was gonna bring it up. I mean, I was very curious. I know we're in full spoiler territory now, but I was very curious if it was actually going to come up, or if it was just we were going to have this knowledge that she had two people that we know were there. And I didn't know if it was just going to leave it. We were not going to get that resolution. So the ending is interesting, and we'll get there too. But yeah, very, very powerful.
I feel like the author is almost daring you to like the main character or empathize with her. Yeah, I agree. I feel like I'm maybe not smart enough to articulate what I'm trying to say here, but I think it's one of those things that's like, oh, I just did something to my screen here. Hold on a second. I feel like it's one of those things that like makes it intentionally hard to empathize with the character. And
right, like not to say she's like a good person, or like not to,
right,
she's a perfect person, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a commentary on like our ability to empathize up to a certain point, and then like at a certain point we're not that good at expressing empathy. And I think that's kind of like the point with her, is that she's so unlikable and so hard to relate to that it makes it really difficult. I have to figure out, I accidentally somehow blew up my screen, so now I can't see the chat questions anymore. So
okay, let me see. I have them. Let me pull them up. Yeah, but I think also like the flip side of this though, and that's why I think this book is just so sometimes I'm like, this could be over my head. Maybe I'm not even understanding all of the layers that she's putting into this, because at the same time, yes, we can empathize with the struggles that she's going through, but she also does and says things that are really out of pocket sometimes. And that's, I think, that's where this balance of like we can empathize, or we can understand the difficulties that she's facing, and still not condone every action that she makes or everything that she says, so it's very complicated character. Do you want to move on to question number 4?
Yes, we can move on to question number 4.
Yeah, I actually feel like this is a pretty good lead-in, because the next question is, how do we feel about her friend Riva? I think it's pronounced Riva. And how was she a good friend or a toxic influence? And mostly I feel like her interactions with Riva were where we really saw her personality come through. So
yeah, Riva. So I feel like Riva and our main character have almost a codependent relationship, because our main character is clearly like in a spiral. She's behaving very toxically. She's not doing things that are good for her. She's binging on pills. She's blacking herself out, refusing to deal with reality. And Riva is like the codependent person that kind of keeps her from plunging off the deep end at points, I think. She's coming over and cleaning her up and giving her food and providing her love and companionship to some degree. But Riva is also, not in a healthy place either. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of felt to me like the relationship you would see between like a drug addict and a codependent parent, where, mom is still coming in and like washing laundry and cleaning things up and like feeding the person, but the person's still like shooting heroin in the bedroom. It just was, really toxic. And then it's also really hard to see the way that Riva is being treated. Like our main character is horrible to Riva. She is very critical of her. She, degrades her, and it's just like a terrible friend. I mean, they're really more frenemies than actual friends. But I do think that there's some reality there. Personally, I don't feel like I've ever had like a frenemy situation that was that extreme. But I will say that like I have seen groups of women be really catty to each other. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that none of that is realistic. I just think that it, maybe was possibly a bit more extreme than normal.
Yeah, for sure. Their relationship is is so confusing, but also just like so intriguing to me. They obviously like, I mean, no matter what each other does to push the other one away, there seems to be like they do kind of just keep coming back to each other.
Mhm.
And even when our main character says, you know, I hate her, I don't want to see her ever again, like she still has this kind of like deep deep-seated love for her friend. That's they just keep coming back to each other despite their criticisms of each other, despite how there's this very toxic, you know, Riva's very jealous of our protagonist who doesn't have a name. That's why we keep calling her that. She's very jealous, and she feels that she constantly has to better herself in order to live up to this image of this person, which is, you know, very just, you know, that's very, very toxic thinking, because this person who she's wanting to be like is meanwhile going through a mental health crisis.
Right.
So it's just, yeah. And then, you know, Riva has her own addictions, and it's very, I think like they're kind of on the, you know, same two sides of the same coin, because our protagonist wants to get out of life. She's exhausted with people trying to like run this rat race and all the external. She's exhausted by it. And then Riva she's the one who's constantly trying to live up to these external pressures. She's motivated by it. She's moved to action by these external factors, whereas yeah, she wants to opt out of them. So it's very, yeah, I guess, yeah, codependent is a good word.
I'm going to catch up a few comments here. So we have Sheila, is her watching videos another way of avoiding seeing the news, etc.?
Probably, yeah, I'd say so.
I would agree. And then Courtney
That's me watching
says,
a reality TV show because I can't process the horrific things going on in the world.
Yep. So Courtney says, hey everyone, I didn't read this book, but sounds wild. It is a wild ride. If you like literary fiction that is kind of edgy and like is going to really push you to think about a lot of things, I think it's a good book. Yeah. Sheila says, think Riva and narrator have their own depression issues and codependency. I would agree. We see Riva is dealing pretty badly with her bulimia, and like I remember when the narrator gets to Riva's house when she's like searching for her own pills and like all the medications that Riva has hidden, and like the house is trashed. She's clearly not taking care of herself, which is really interesting because we see Riva constantly coming over to our narrator and cleaning her house and taking out her garbage and like trying to keep her a little bit better, I guess. And then you see that she has no ability to do that for herself at the end there.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like she's not expecting someone to see her house, right? Like if she knew someone was going to see it, that probably wouldn't be the case, because Riva's very focused on external validation. And yeah.
And then Brian says, all true about Riva, but she cares enough about her to get on the train to go to her mom's funeral, even after a night out and off her head. She remembered she told Riva she would go, and she went. So I agree. There are like a few glimpses of moments of humanity in our main character. Like the funeral is one. And then like at the end, when she's giving away all her stuff to Riva, because she knows that Riva really wants it, like you can see that at some small corner of her soul somewhere, she might actually care about Riva a little bit. But I do think that she's following that up with actions that indicate that she really doesn't give a shit that much. You know, like she gives away all her stuff to Riva, and then she talks about like, this is the last time I see her. And then there's one other meeting where they see each other, but it's very superficial. And she just doesn't even seem that fussed. And even at the end of the book, when we know that it's likely that Riva jumped out of the Twin Towers, she doesn't seem very sympathetic at all. Like she doesn't seem particularly moved. Yeah. She doesn't seem like she's like, oh my gosh, you know, this shocked me back to reality. My best friend had to jump out of an exploding tower. She's just like, it was cool. It made me feel alive. You know, she looked like she was, let me find the exact quote.
She's a very apathetic person, just overall. Yeah.
I'm overcome by awe, not because she looks like Riva and I think it's her, almost exactly her, and not because Riva and I had been friends or because I'll ever see her again, but because she's beautiful. There she is, a human being diving into the unknown, and she is wide awake. This is her talking about her best friend plummeting out of the Twin Towers. Like, that's just, I think that was that ending really just nailed home that unlikable and relatable part. Because I think actually up until that point in the book, I was like kind of rooting for her in some ways, and then that was like sealed the deal and like, ugh, this makes her unlikable for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Great point. What's the next question?
Next question, yes. Oh, if I can, yes. Our next question is, how did you feel about the lack of plot in this book? Was the character compelling enough to make up for the lack of movement? Good question.
So I didn't mind it. Sometimes that works for me and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm always a little nervous when I start reading a book and I notice that there is really no plot. Again, it's hard because you don't like this character. You're not going to like this character. But I felt like she was interesting enough that I wanted to keep reading her. I didn't find it a big struggle not having that much plot. I was kind of curious to see like if we got through this year of rest and relaxation, if there was something, big that was going to happen at the end. But it's really much more quiet in the ending and nothing monumentous. Well, aside from her friend, plummeting out of the Twin Towers. That's pretty big.
Aside from that moment.
Well, I think it's just because in the book it's treated like so minimal. I mean, you get like a tiny little page about it. I don't mean not monumental. Sorry, that was like horrible phrasing.
No. I just mean, I just think it is funny because it actually does. I was surprised it had any events at all in it. So actually it's kind of, no, I definitely, I was actually surprised that it had as much plot as it had. I was expecting like literally virtually no plot. I will say though, I do think it dragged in the middle a little bit, but it did pick up with Reva's mother's funeral. I think like right before then, I was like kind of starting to like fatigue a little bit with the like, I was like, okay, where I felt that the conversations that Moshfegh I thought she was trying to have were kind of exhausted in the earlier two chapters. We kind of had this section where I was like, I wasn't really following what the point was, but I don't know. I think kind of that is the point, that I'm not going to understand this character.
Right. I would agree with that. I don't think we're meant to understand everything about her. I don't think we're meant to like everything about her. I think that you could probably read this 2 or 3 times and keep picking up new bits and pieces. This is kind of one of those things that I struggle with literary fiction sometimes, is I feel like, if it's a really good book, maybe I get like 50% of it. And then I feel like I leave it sometimes and I'm like, I'm sure there's stuff that I'm missing. And this is one of those books where I'm sure there's things that went over my head.
Yeah. I was very curious as to how, I was like, what are we going to do with 300 pages of this character who's sleeping for a year? Like, where is this going?
Right.
And well, she doesn't quite sleep the whole time, as we found out.
I think the ending where she was like, the last 4 months were particularly fascinating, where she was like passing out for 3 days, waking up, eating like a slice of pizza, stretching, taking vitamins, washing her clothes, taking a shower, and like throwing everything in the dryer was really interesting. Like she really thought about how to check out completely with just like the barest amount of stuff to kind of keep her alive. I wonder how practical that actually is. Like if you for 4 months ate a couple slices of pizza and a handful of vitamins every 3 days, like I feel like you would be like pretty close to dead by the time that you woke up.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's clear like when she finally gets up, she's not really healthy. She passes out as she's trying to walk out of her building. But like, I feel like you would be borderline skeletal. I know that she is sleeping, so she's not burning like an excess of calories, but your body still has a certain amount of calories it needs per day. And she's certainly not getting that with a couple slices of cold pizza every 3 days. So it's kind of interesting, like the practicality of that and like if that's that realistic or not.
I was thinking something along the lines too. I was like, so this person is basically like on like bed rest, and they have, if you're on like, if you have a medical condition to the point that you cannot, walk for long periods of time, like they have to like, you have to do things to avoid very serious medical problems. Like, well, she mentions like her, her muscles, she can feel her muscles getting weaker and stuff like that. And if you're if you're to the point where you're like literally not moving at all, like she is, like, yeah, Well, I would just say I wouldn't recommend this.
Definitely not. I can say that. So like I just went through this medical procedure and I was on modified bed rest for almost a month. Like I could get up and make myself a sandwich. And that was like basically the majority of exercise that I was able to get in like a day. And just in that 1 month, like my cardiovascular fitness has gone down, my muscle tone has gotten down. Like now I'm able to walk more. So I'm like out walking my dog and I come back and I'm like out of breath and tired. And I was in really good shape before I went into this. So that's just after 1 month of bed rest. So like after 4 months, your muscles would be so wasted away. I just think that bit of the book was probably a little unrealistic. I mean, not that there weren't other parts of this that were unrealistic.
Right.
But I just was like reading that going, I just don't think that this is really feasible. I think at a certain point she might have starved to death.
I mean, I was like, the amount of like pill mixing she's doing, she's not really counting. She says she's sort of keeping track, but she doesn't know the effects of mixing these things together. I was just like,
she's not a medical professional.
Advised. This is so dangerous. And she obviously is, has an addiction to these things at this point. It's just, no.
And it's wild too, because we have this psychiatrist, psychologist lady that's just like, like here, take this, take that, like that in and of itself is just, I feel like somebody like that would be disbarred so quickly from, practice. So it's interesting that like she continues as long into the story as she does. Like nobody is like, hey, let me report this lady that's just like giving out drugs for free. And then like the pharmacist, oh, well, never mind. She's not going to a pharmacist. I remember most of the time the doctor had the pills.
Yeah, they would like give her the samples. Yeah. She was crazy. The therapist, or I don't really know if it was a therapist. I'm not exactly sure what her title was, but yeah, she was crazy just to allow this person to just get so many different, drugs. That's just so dangerous. But I guess, sadly, there probably are people out there that do that.
Yeah. I was just looking to see at the beginning. I'm trying to find the beginning where Dr. Tuttle shows up the first time, because I'm curious to see like if it mentions, because she does call her doctor the whole time, Dr. Tuttle. Yeah. But I don't remember if it mentions like, she seemed so woo-woo and out there. It was pretty funny.
I did find a lot of humor in those scenes. I found it sad but also hilarious that like the therapist could not, she couldn't remember that her patient's parents had both died. Like that's like such a huge thing in someone's file, and that like she just like repeatedly could not remember that and played that down. Yikes. That's so bad.
Let me pop a couple questions up real quick. Let's see. Sheila said, I could see that I was starting to wonder, where is this going? I think this was when we were talking about Riva. I'm not sure.
Or it could have also been referring to the lack of plot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, it got backed up, so I didn't see where specifically. Hey, Caitlin, it's Bernadette. I hope you remember me. Of course, I remember you, Bernadette. How are you doing? Then we have a comment from Brian. I couldn't believe anyone could live through the amount and combination of drugs she took. I agree. I think that that's probably the second like super unrealistic thing, is that like, she was taking enough drugs to tranquilize a horse at one point.
And blacking out for days. That's crazy.
And then Sheila said, think all the characters had issues and strange. I agree. There was no like solid, healthy character. I think everybody that we see like as a main or main supporting is pretty toxic in one way or the other. I think that I forgot what the made up medication name was, Imeritrol or intermitterol. I don't know how to say it. That one. So it kind of makes me think of like Seroquel. In treating like post-traumatic stress, especially with like soldiers and stuff, they'll use a drug like Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic. And it's like when somebody's like in an acute crisis, they'll use it. So my ex-husband dealt with severe post-traumatic stress. And when he came back from Iraq the second time, he wasn't sleeping for days on end and like really chaotic. And so they would give him Seroquel, and it would pretty much like black him out for a good 24 hours, sometimes like 32 hours. And it was really interesting because sometimes he could wake up on it and he wouldn't remember waking up or anything that he did in those periods of time. And some of those stories where you hear about like people snapping that are having severe post-traumatic stress and they have like a snap, it's kind of shown like some of those drugs can affect that. And so that's kind of what I thought that was supposed to be mirroring, as like a really heavy duty antipsychotic, because that is actually like the result of some of those. Maybe not quite 3 days, but definitely for long periods of time, it can black someone out.
Wow, yeah. I definitely have never had, or I don't know anyone that's had experience with that heavy of that powerful of a drug.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't prior either. And when he started taking it and was like, he would literally be like comatose for 24 hours, 32 hours. And then just behaving really, really weird if he woke up. And I was like, when I started looking into it, because I was like, I've never seen this reaction either. Then that's like how I started finding out it's antipsychotic. Sometimes they use it for people that are like in severe crisis for schizophrenia. It's common for post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Like any really severe like mental health snap, basically. And it has a lot of really bad side effects. So, I mean, it's kind of similar to like what she's taking. But if you're taking a drug that powerful, like, I don't think it's simply like, oh, I'm just going to take this and black out.
Exactly.
Like,
I mean, and that's even pointing to how ridiculous this therapist would have been to prescribe this to someone who is, I mean, I don't think she even claimed, I mean, I think she claimed she had some weird dreams. That was like the extent of what she even claimed. So, yikes. Yeah.
Yeah. Just generally, I mean, the cocktail of drugs seemed like they were mirroring like, Xanax and antidepressants. Like at the end when Riva takes away the medication, I know she mentions there's Ativan, let's see, Inferitrol. There was a couple Ambien. So, I mean, there's some like real drugs that she mentions in here. Trazodone. Yep. So trazodone, I actually recently took at the hospital after my surgery because I couldn't sleep. It's like just a minor sedative. It doesn't really do much. But Ambien can cause like wild stuff. So mixing trazodone and Ambien is like two, potentially sedatives. And then Ativan is an anti-anxiety medication. So you're like mixing sleep meds plus, she would have been a mess for sure. Sorry. I'm just like, that's really stuff is hard to like believe,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
do we have any further comments on this, or should we move on to we have 2 more questions?
Yeah, you can move on to the next question.
Okay. Our next question is, how did you feel about the ending? Was the woman falling from the towers Riva? And how do we feel about our main character's final thoughts? So we did touch on this a little.
Yep.
I think the ending was, I don't know. I mean, the ending was a little strange because she does sort of, I guess, accomplish her goal for a little bit. And then we just have this really insane, crazy, huge situation that she then immediately deals with. And we don't get to see anything. After that, we don't know how she reacts to this, horrific event. We don't really see, I think that was just such a powerful thing that this book does. It's like, okay, this character kind of goes through something. She kind of looks like she wants to start, moving forward in life. And then we just have this thing that, really nobody could really move forward from. And I think that was a very powerful ending. And I don't know if it was Riva. I really don't. I don't know what to make of the ending, to be honest. I really don't know.
Yeah, the ending was rough for sure. So we get like one tiny page basically talking about September 11th happening and her watching the Twin Towers collapse. And, she's pretty certain that Riva was the woman that was falling out of the building and her chute falls off. There's like that famous footage. And I don't know if I'm supposed to read it as her being in shock. Like she's watching it and she's completely like shocked out watching her friend fall out of the towers. And that's why there's a lack of emotion. Because if you are viewing her as somebody that's like human and compassionate, then I guess it's like appropriate to view like, I mean, I think as somebody that remembers, watching it, I felt a sense of shock watching it without having anyone actually in the building.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine, like, if you felt like you're watching your friend fall out of the Twin Towers, that it might cause like that emotional detachment.
Yeah.
But having spent the whole book with her and seeing how she was with Riva and how she treated her throughout, and how, like, even in her best moments, she's still pretty shitty to Riva. It makes me really be like, or makes me really think that she's just like apathetic about her friend falling out of this building. And I think that made, I don't know, it made me feel pretty conflicted about the book.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of power in the last sentence to kind of like sway how you've been feeling. I think that I've been like trying to process this ending because there is a line that she says earlier that she says, I continue to watch it, the videotape that she's talking about. I continue to watch it, usually on a lonely afternoon or any other time I doubt that life is worth living, or when I need courage, or when I'm bored. And then she's saying, and then at the, that's, she's saying, there she is, a human being diving into the unknown. She is wide awake. So that is like where I do kind of like, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit because she says, I usually watch on a lonely afternoon. Or any other time I doubt that life is worth living. And then she's saying that she's seeing this person that's jumping out of the tower, presumably to try to stay alive. I see that's, I'm like scratching my head. That's because I'm like, is she saying that she's feeling some sort of inspiration to keep going from this, or is how am I meant to take this? I really don't know.
I don't think that she is saying necessarily that her friend is trying to stay alive, because the people that were jumping out of the towers were jumping like out of a height where you're not going to survive it.
Yeah.
So I think that it's more the free fall where she's saying she's wide awake. It's like that moment before impact where you're like full of adrenaline and you're jolted,
Yeah. So to really so she's talking about, because she does say like, or when I need courage, or when I am bored. And she's a very apathetic character. She's a very apathetic person, and she struggles with feeling any emotions at all. Like there was a whole section where she tries to make herself feel sad, and she thinks of all of the horrible moments in her life, and it still doesn't really work. And so is this just is this her kind of trying to reflect on the fact that she's spent all of this time trying to be numb and trying not to feel, and is this a moment where she's trying to inspire herself to feel something?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought like, oh, we're going to get the aha moment because she's like, it inspires me to think that life is worth living. And you're like, okay, well, I could see how you take that out of it, like extreme tragedy, right? This like horrible, tragic thing. So now I have to live because all these other people didn't. But then, you get the when I'm bored. You're like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, you're on the right track with when life is worth living, or with courage. And then you get to, or when I'm bored, like, oh yeah, I just need something to do.
Yeah.
Let me just watch thousands of people die. Like,
sure. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm like reading this and I'm like, what am I think, yeah, this is really just very exemplary of how you really feel, or how I felt the entire book. I'm like, I think like I could make the case, or like I could try to follow the logic here of how you could try to feel something based on this, but in the end, it does not click with me. I'm like, I don't know what we're trying to get at.
I agree. And I mean, I think it's meant to be that way. Like, I think, you're meant to feel conflicted the whole way through. And then you have an ending that kind of leaves you, to draw your own conclusions, I guess.
Yeah. It's crazy. That is a crazy way to end a book. It is. It is. Very memorable, though. I'll say that.
Yeah. Let's see. So we have one comment. Bernadette said, I never read the book. Oh, well, if you like really emotionally conflicting characters, a book that's set in New York in the year 2000 and is focused on somebody with a whole lot of privilege, basically sitting around and moping about how miserable her life is, then you may enjoy this book. If you want a book that's like more plot heavy and action adventure, this is definitely not going to be the book for you.
This is really unlike anything I've ever read before, because I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I feel about her. I don't know how I feel about the whole experience. And if you haven't read this book and you're just hearing us talk about
how
9/11 in this context is so crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're definitely not doing a good job of selling why you should read it. Like, I think we talked about that at the very beginning of the discussion. So, like, if you heard us talking about it at the beginning, why we rated it, what we rated it and stuff. But when you get into like the different plot points and discussion points, it definitely, if that was all you heard, it would be hard to like understand why anyone would want to read it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think too of any books that I've read that had like a similar. I don't think I've had any that were similar in terms of just like a super like focused on somebody. But I feel like I've read some books with really difficult characters before where I felt like they were like kind of running around whining. I'm trying to like think of what they were.
I don't tend to have the issue that a lot of people have where they're like, oh, this character is so unlikable, I can't read them. I tend like that is not something that I usually run into.
Mhm.
Like it's just not something that bothers me really. Like I don't mind if a character is unlikable and that's the intention. They're supposed to be like I'm interested in the characters that are not perfect, that they're not, cookie cutter, like
Right.
that they're rough around the edges. Like I'm interested in that. And not to say that I like, condone any of their actions, but I never have a problem with an unlikable character. And even here, I didn't have a problem. Like I wasn't wanting to put down the book because I was so irritated with her. It's very much just a matter of like how much how much enjoyment you get out of being in this very uncomfortable space. And I think that a book that comes to mind for me is I Who Have Never Known Men, which is not similar to this really, but I had a similar feeling of the whole time reading it being just like, I don't think I enjoy this and I don't think I understand it, but I feel that there's a lot of complexity to it.
So Bernadette said, "Don't spoil it, Caitlin." So Bernadette, if you do not want this book spoiled, you should click out of this discussion because we are discussing like the whole book. I'm sure you probably didn't see it at the beginning, but we did put up a spoiler warning because we're discussing like a bunch of questions about it. So if you don't want to hear like any main discussion of the plot, then I would definitely go ahead and leave the chat at this point because the rest of the discussion will continue to spoil the book.
Yeah. Read the book, come back, watch the video.
Yeah, leave some comments. Let us know what you think at the end.
Yeah.
So
I have one question left if you want to.
Yep, I have a couple more comments.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
And then she said, I'm interested in reading characters that have an edge to them. So then this one might be worth checking out. But yeah, definitely probably don't watch the end of this chat just so we don't spoil the rest of it for you. And then Brian said, I definitely think it was Riva. I thought that maybe she seemed okay with Riva's death because she saw Riva as finally breaking free from her need to do what others do. Oh, that's a really interesting point. Okay, so I didn't necessarily look at it that way. I think I was so caught up in like the callousness of it. But that's a much more charitable way to look at it for sure.
That is very interesting. That is, yeah. I'll need to think on that and process. I mean, I honestly, I just finished this book like earlier today, so I really need to process this a little bit more.
Me too. So I was doing reading sprints this afternoon at 2, and I think I read like the last 30 or 40 chapters in the reading sprints. And so I had like an hour and a half to try to put thoughts together.
Yeah, I had a couple hours that I was like, okay, like try to understand all of this, but I definitely think this is going to have to sit a little bit longer. But this discussion is great. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's nice to like have time to process thoughts. So Sheila says, I agree with Brian. Okay. So 2 people that think it was maybe because Riva was breaking free. Okay. Maybe also she's like in a certain way, like feeling that about herself. Like, she went through this whole process and like, she's like not envious necessarily, but like, oh, I finally broke free of my thing. Now she's breaking free of her thing. I don't know. Yeah, that's definitely not a perspective that I had considered prior to this comment right now, honestly.
Yeah, me either.
Cool.
This is our last question if you want the last one. Oh, well, we kind of talked about this already. The last question is just, does a main character have to be likable for the book to be good?
I don't think so. I have read a handful of books where the character is unlikable. And I think that it can be done really well. So I just finished, for example, Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. And I feel like both of the characters are really hard to like or understand throughout the book. I mean, there's moments where you might like them more and moments where you might like them less, but same thing, difficult characters to like be inside their heads. And I thought that it was a really compelling read because they were difficult characters. I'm trying to think, like Bunny is another one where the character is a hard, character to relate to. I'm trying to think. Severance. I recently read Severance. I felt like that was like a harder character to get into. And sometimes it's more successful and sometimes it's less successful. But I don't necessarily feel like likability is a factor in whether the book is going to be good or not.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to likability, I think. I mean, and like for me, I don't need to like a character, and by that I mean I don't need to. If this person existed in the world, would I, be friends with them? Would I get along with them? I don't know. I don't need to like them, but I do need to understand them. And I felt like I felt like I understood this character to a point, and then there's just some choices she would do things that are just so far out of the realm of my brain wouldn't even come up with that.
Right.
So like that's where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to connect that well with this character, but I do think, as we were talking about in the very first question, I do think I kind of understand her reasoning for it. And even though I don't agree with, the way she treated her friend or the way she, went about her life, her job, her, responsibilities, I do think I understand why she would do something like that. So.
Yeah, I think like you can still see something as flawed and understand it at the same time, right? Like obviously her methodology here is very flawed.
Yeah.
But you can understand like in her like delusional sense of what's going on and her sense of need for wellness and everything, like where she's trying to get to, I guess. So I think as long as you have that element where like you don't have to agree or think it's like the most logical step, but you have to be able to understand the motivation. So I mean, I think that was pretty clear throughout this book, and that made it a readable book. I think if it lacked that ability to see why the character was trying to do this and like what her end goal was, then maybe not so much.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So a couple more comments. Maybe this was the narrator's way of breaking free. Yeah, I could see that. Definitely like some food for thought for sure. And like the ability comes and goes. Don't think she liked herself. Yeah, I would agree that the character is probably not real happy with herself. Struggling with a lot of things. The other thing too that, kind of I'm just actually this comment is kind of making me think about right now is like our character keeps reassuring us that she's wealthy and good looking and this and that. Like maybe she's not feeling real good about herself. Maybe she's feeling very insecure. And this is why she keeps like being brash and reassuring us. And it's like, again, another shield from all that insecurity.
Yeah, especially through her relationship with Trevor. That was his name. I think that's a great example of that.
We didn't even touch on that.
We didn't even touch on that. That was also wild.
Yeah, that was another just like really difficult. Like I was like, why is this girl demeaning herself for this trash man? Like, there's nothing likable or redeeming about him. He's not like
no, he's awful to her. Awful.
Yeah, and it's not like I don't know how to say this without being a little bit like crass, but it's not like he's like blowing her back out and giving her an amazing time. Like it's just
no, the opposite, really.
You're like, what is it? What is the attraction? Like he's not, he doesn't seem like he's a nice guy. He doesn't seem particularly intelligent. He doesn't seem like he's like, wow, what a great catch. He's not physically like satisfying her in any way, shape, or form. So you're like, why are you so focused on this man? Like, and it's just, I think that actually almost at a certain point becomes another coping mechanism. Like instead of focusing on her messed up childhood and her parents' deaths and processing emotions, she's just like, I'm going to fixate on this terribly toxic person.
Yeah. I think that like, at least this is probably true in real life, but sticking to the fictional, I find that a lot of times in contemporary books that are really about a personal identity. And I find that authors will often use a relationship, a really toxic relationship, to kind of display the characters' feelings about themselves.
Right.
And that's very evident here, that she's, not that she's putting up with this and going through with this horrible relationship. This book is crazy. This book is actually crazy.
There's so many like cringy points, honestly. It just, you're cringing at how she treats her friends. You're cringing at the way that she's doing things. You're cringing at the relationship. Like there's just, it's definitely a book that was intended to make you uncomfortable as a reader. I think that's like ultimately what I took from this at the end of the day is, I think Moshfegh likes to intentionally make readers uncomfortable. I'm kind of nervous because I have Lapvona by Moshfegh on my TBR for July.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That one's like a satire, but it's set, from what I remember, in like a vague Eastern European town, and it's like got some really gruesome scenes in it, I guess.
Okay.
I've heard a little bit. I've like a long time ago heard some spoilers for it, and I'm just like, I don't know if I really want to read it.
No idea what that one's about. I don't know what any of her other stuff is about. This is the only one that I knew the premise of. The other ones I really don't know anything about, but I do know that she is known for writing some really out of the box stuff, and like pushing boundaries, making you feel uncomfortable, writing women in a way that people are not comfortable engaging with. Like, just, really, really interesting author. I'm glad I got to read her for this experience. I thought this was great.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like a big bang for the first book.
I know. I'm like, I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about this book.
Qualifications, who needs them? You don't need a literary degree to talk about literature. Yeah, well, I think we have a couple more comments.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Bernadette, when are you doing another reading sprint? My next one is Monday at 9 a.m. If you go in the live section, I believe, on my YouTube channel, you should be able to find all the ones that are scheduled. Sheila said security. I think that's in reference to the comment about her maybe feeling insecure, like continually talking about herself. They don't have to be likable, but I have to enjoy spending time reading about them. Yeah, I agree. I think if the book is a misery, then, it's hard to feel motivated to continue. There is a book, White Ivy, I read a while back that I felt that way, where I just found the main character so unlikable. Her motivations were so hard for me to deal with that it was like I slogged through it, but I was just like, I can't. It was one of those ones where I'm like, I didn't enjoy the time reading them either, Sheila, I agree, but I wonder if she did after her year of rest and relaxation.
Oh, is this in response to the breaking free comment?
Oh, probably, yeah. I don't know. It seems that she started to get to a better place maybe after she woke up. She's like enjoying life, getting to the park, listening to music.
I think that was one of the most shocking things for me, was that actually at the end of the book, she said, my experiment actually kind of worked. I was like, oh, okay, well, wasn't expecting that.
I wonder though, like, so did the experiment actually work, or did she just program it into her head that like, I'm going to wallow for a year and then I'm going to get up and just like be done with it?
Maybe. Yeah, no idea.
My mom said, I realize I have a bias against her because she's privileged, which is probably not fair. I think that's part of the point. Like, Otessa Moshfegh could have, again, written like a middle-class person going through this, or like somebody that was economically disadvantaged going through this. And she intentionally chose somebody that is wealthy and privileged. And I think that, again, that's that commentary on like how empathetic we are as individuals to suffering. Like, if you make it somebody that's unlikable and unrelatable, are we able to empathize with her? And I think that's part of the point of the book. I don't know how to like phrase that exactly, but I think that there's some kind of commentary in there. Maybe some commentary not all the way getting,
No, I mean, I also think it's fair though. Like you're saying, which is probably not fair because, I have this bias. I think it's actually totally fair to have that bias. And honestly, I think that if some people read this book, they'll come out of this and be like, I get that, we're trying to empathize with this character. I get that we're trying to, take this look at this, level of, mental illness to some degree. I get that, but I still hate this book because she's choosing to do something that just people just do not have the privilege of doing. Like, I totally get that. And I think that's like where there's so many layers to this that and layers upon layers that I'm not even fully like processing.
Well,
So I think it's completely I think this is why this book is controversial and
I think
for other reasons too, but
sorry, I'm so bad at that. I think it's also fair to like resent her, like I think it's fair to be like, well, I've been through these like miserable experiences in my life and I didn't get to just quit my job and wallow for a year.
Yeah.
I've dealt with multiple losses and had to keep working through those losses. So like there's a part of me that's like, wow, like I don't, get a call out sick because I'm having a bad day, and this character takes it to the extreme. It's not like she takes a week off of work to grieve. She takes a whole entire year. So I think that it's like natural to feel like some resentment and frustration towards that. Let's see. About Trevor. Oh, I think the security comment was about Trevor. Okay. And then Brian said, a great point, Jamie, that the author uses Trevor to show the narrator's feelings about themselves. Yep. Oh, man. Ugh, Trevor.
I know. I actually like thinking about him. It just like, I can't.
He was just so bad. Such a mess. Like, I've read a lot of messy male romantic leads. I guess can you even call him a romantic lead, really? But just like the obsession with his like sexual proclivities and like his complete disinterest in her, and it's so sad because she's just so clearly like his back burner girl. He never has any significant interest in her, and he just treats her so horribly. I think that might have been the hardest part of the book for me. Like at least her and Riva like seem to be kind of on equal footing, whereas like Trevor was always like I feel like he had the more of the power in the dynamic, and it was just ugh.
Yeah, he is a very, very icky part of this book. Very difficult to deal with.
I think it's like ickier too because like, well, I haven't personally dated anyone that was like that because I would never ever tolerate somebody treating me that way. But I have had friends that have like hung on to situations like that where they're just like, you're like, why are you chasing this dude around? Like, what is he doing for you that is worth this amount of care and effort? Like, why do you keep inviting him places? And so I think that makes it like even cringier because you can like, I could see parts, not all the way, but elements of like friends that were dating at different periods of time.
Yeah, sure. So. Yeah, I think it's just the combination of her being so apathetic about things generally, and then she like and then she's just like she even acts like she's like pretends not to have any real interest in him, but then she just is just constantly begging for him to come back, and it's just like, please, no, you don't deserve that.
Yeah. And then she's thinking about him like long after they break up too. Like she keeps bringing him up and you're like, girl, how long has this man been gone? Like, again, what is it? What is the obsession? Like, yeah. So. Yep.
All right. Well, those are all the questions we have.
Yep.
Formal ones anyway.
Yep. I think we've covered it pretty well.
To the best of our abilities. We really tried.
Yeah. What do you think about the cover?
I kind of love it. I'm obsessed with this pink color, so that's a good, yeah.
I really like that too. Like the picture is so dull and dreary, and then definitely like I like the pops, the neon pops in it. That's pretty cool. So
I also feel like I got like immediately from this cover, I was like, okay, this is going to be about like depiction of womanhood and I was very aware from the premise of this book that we were going to talk about this female character in just the opposite way that we would expect femininity. And I feel like I feel like that kind of, I love this cover. I love it.
So it's kind of interesting. It threw me off just a little bit because I felt like it was kind of looked like some like historical art like the way that she's dressed and the way she's kind of gazing off, and like it just kind of threw me back to like some of the like old paintings that you would see in like a art museum.
Yeah. And speaking of, I mean, art is a big theme in this book that we didn't really touch on, but
It's true, we didn't.
yeah, but this absolutely does look like a piece of art. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to I kind of love it, but I don't know why.
I get it. What did you, speaking of the art, like what did you think of the whole like art project at the end? Like any thoughts on why she's like allowing this guy to record her and that whole deal?
I mean, I think what was just the most kind of ironic in that situation, and like she's the character is well aware of this irony, and that's part of the reason she does it, is because she thinks that this guy is like kind of a hack and like not he doesn't, make real art, and now she's allowing herself to be the subject of his art. So you know what? I love a good bit of irony. All of the things about art in this book, definitely this was a section that really went over my head. I'm like, I don't know what we're dealing with here. I don't know what we're trying to do. I think the discussion about art is tough because especially the gallery that she works at is contemporary, it's modern art, and that's always it's very much up for interpretation. It often has to be explained by the artist to understand what you're looking at, and it's kind of up to you to decide whether or not that counts as art. And I'm not an art person, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not super well versed in art either, aside from like occasionally visiting a museum on vacation somewhere. So I don't know if I got all of it, but I did think it was kind of like a funny stereotype of like, the hacky, artist that's like just doing stuff that's extremely edgy and calling it art.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I get what his motivation was in doing it. I just kind of, I don't know. She just, with everything else, she just seems so apathetic. She's like, yeah, whatever. As long as you bring me my pizza, I don't care what you do. So
yeah.
I just remember too, like thinking as I was reading that, like that's so much trust to put into someone because she's literally completely blacked out. And, I mean, like, I guess as a woman, like the first thing that pops into my head is all the horrifying things that this guy could do. Cause it's not like she like, I mean, she knows him, but she's not like it. Yeah. I mean, she didn't like pull a random
though. She said, she's like, oh, I don't even care. She's like, at first she was like, well, he's not going to because he's gay. And then she's like, and if it happens, oh, well, like I won't remember it. I'm like, okay, jeez.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I buy that. I wonder if like there was a line, like a threshold that could have been passed eventually. But yeah, in my head, I was like kind of dreading reading further into that section. Cause I just was like, I don't know if they're setting up something really bad.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to her. And that's going to be like the kick in the ass, or if it's going to like make her finally take that final leap. Or I felt so much anxiety reading that section.
Yeah. I can understand that. I don't think my mind didn't necessarily go that way, but I could totally understand that. It was very weird, the whole situation.
Yep. All right. So I think we've kind of gotten to the end of all of like the things we wanted to touch base on. Do you have any like final conclusion points?
I'm excited to read more from Moshfegh in the future.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting piece of literature.
I'm glad I picked it up because I don't think I would have otherwise. I think I was trying to steer clear of this book because I was like, oh, there's, I don't know. I was afraid.
I feel like, so like my mom read this, I think I told you already, but my mom read this a couple months prior to me reading this. And she was just like, I hated this book. And I'm like, I've been wanting to read Moshfegh. So she gave me her copy. And I feel like sometimes my mom and I, like most of the time, my mom and I agree on books, but I feel like sometimes with like literary fiction, it's one of those books or one of those genres that can be so like divisive. So I was like, let me read it anyways, because maybe this will be one. And I can't say that I like, raving about it, but I definitely am curious to read more of Moshfegh's books in the future. Let me see. Found the day of the sprint. Yep, every Monday. Great discussion.
Oh no, we lost her. I don't know. Hello. Okay, well, discussion. What's the next book we'll be reading? we do not know. We'll probably put up another poll, and it's not going to be monthly. I think we're going to work on bi-monthly.
Sorry, I have no idea what happened there.
I was free spitballing. I was like, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I have no idea. I didn't even touch anything. It just like all of a sudden I was like, oh.
It's okay. We held down the fort.
So sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I was reading the next comment. What's the next book you'll be reading? We don't know yet. I think we're gonna put up another poll, or I don't know yet.
Yeah, so I think we're going to just continue doing what we did with the last one. So the way we framed the last one is that Jamie picked 2 books off her shelf. I picked 2 books off of my shelf. They have to be published outside of 5 years ago. And then we put them in a poll and let people vote. So I think that worked pretty well. We both came up with a couple really interesting ideas. And that way, like, we can check behind the scenes and make sure like neither of us has read the book. And then, so I'm thinking probably like in July, we'll put up the poll so we can get an idea, and that gives people time to like get the book. And then in August, we'll do the reading and the discussion of it. And so as you were mentioning, I think we had discussed doing bi-monthly just because we both have jobs, and, you know, with like booktube and everything on top of it, we want to make sure that we're, at least for now, approaching it realistically. And, you know, other people have other book clubs they want to read for and like their own TBRs and stuff. So I think bi-monthly will be maintainable.
Yes, definitely. Couldn't do monthly, but bi-monthly, I'm like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, it's approachable. So probably in the next week or 2, I'll get a poll up for voting for the book, and then we'll announce the actual like reading period starting August. Okay. Pink is my favorite color. Yeah, I really like the bright pink that's on this particular book. Not sure if I could read other books by her. Well,
that's I understand.
I don't know if I would want to read binge read her whole backlist. Like, I definitely think I would be interested in reading more of her books, but not like a ton of them together. Like, after I finish Lapvona, I think I will probably be good for a good while.
I can't wait to hear how that goes. I'm curious about Eileen. That's the only one that I'm like really looking at, but then we'll see.
I've heard really good reviews of McGlue. I think it might be a short story. Oh, yeah. But yeah, I think this is like, she kind of some ways reminds me of Mona Awad, where it's like, I like the writing style, but I don't think like I would want to read all of her books back to back. Like, maybe once a year is enough. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, sorry. That's a good idea to get everything off the shelves. Yes, that is why we called it the Backlist Book Club, because we're working through our backlists, and hopefully we're working on everyone else's backlists too. I think we're, trying to pick books that were popular at a time and maybe, get pushed back by new releases and stuff. So yeah, hopefully, it'll motivate people to get through those books that are maybe not the most like current at the moment, but still worth reading. So I think this is a good cutoff point. I want to say thank you to everybody that joined us for the chat. And, this was a fun discussion. It was really nice hearing all the thoughts. I think especially with a book like this, it was really helpful, like listening to the different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely one book where I'm like, I don't know if I feel confident in any of the thoughts I have about it, but that's what makes it a good discussion book. So I think mission accomplished.
All right. So thank you, everybody. Again, look for a poll in the next week, probably. And then, August 1st, I'll get a post up talking about when we're going to read it and when we're going to have a discussion. Thank you, Jamie, for joining me for this endeavor. Like, I'm really excited to finally get something like this going. And it was a good discussion and a lot of fun planning this with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Loved it.
All right, so we're going to end that live stream here, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.